The second race, and one that we didn't spend a lot of money in but were able to have a huge impact, was down in Albert Lea, where Representative Shannon Savick was running for re-election, and her opponent was Peggy Bennett. And this is Shannon Savick. I picked the most embarrassing photo of her that I could find, but she actually had this on her webpage, which I thought was great. So Shannon Savick is on the House Public Safety Committee, and during the gun control hearings, never once asked a question, never once challenged any of the gun control assertions that were being made. And she's from an area that's filled with ranges, the state's largest gun show in Wells, Minnesota, and lots of sportsmen and hunters and all the kind of usual things going on down there. And in fact, when we got up, and Rob, who's our political director, got up to testify in opposition to gun control legislation, she actually got up and walked out instead of listening to our testimony. So we were really interested in beating her. We mailed cards like this. They were actually bright safety yellow when they went out, so they were hard to miss, that told people to vote for Peggy Bennett over Shannon Savick and why. We sent about 1,800 of these. So it's a good example of when you're doing mail, you want to use a mail house. So you need to find a mailing firm, and there's tons of them here in the Twin Cities and across the state. But you want someone that can print this for you at a reasonable cost. But more importantly, they have the bulk mailing permits that let you mail things at about half the cost of what it would cost you or I to go to the mailbox and do. Postcards like this were 17 cents each in 2014. And then you pay a little of, you pay some fee to the mail house to do that kind of thing for you. We also did something really, really interesting in this campaign, in this race, and in other races that we spent money in 2014. As we were talking about earlier, we bought voter data. And one of the things that we went looking for was we were trying to figure out, people sometimes don't vote, right? Maybe they're interested in one race, but if they're not interested in maybe the big marquee race that year, they might just stay home. So a lot of people didn't vote in 2012 or 2010 or didn't vote in both years. So we used the voter data to tell us, well, who didn't vote in either 2010 or 2012, but leans our way politically. Like, we know they're pro-gun because of other information. So we found about 1,800 people in Shannon Savick's district that didn't vote in 12 or 2010, but were pro-gun. And the margin of victory for Shannon Savick in 2012 was about 650 votes. So if I can get half or a third of that group to show up at the polls and vote my way, well, then I've unseated Shannon Savick. So we sent letters, and this is not the same one we used there. We sent letters the week before the election through our mail house. So too late for them to respond because they're going to hit the box about 2 days before the election. And the letter basically says, I know you may not be excited about the races that are out there, but I know that you're pro-gun, and I know that people don't always vote. I need you to come out and vote for this person. And here's why. I think the example we have here is from a different race where we had a candidate who said they supported the Second Amendment, but we had evidence that he didn't, because he took our survey and said that he supported all this gun control, but then he was telling people that he was pro-gun, which was really not good campaigning on his part. So post-election, we saw an 8% lift in people that, we had 8% higher turnout in the districts where we sent these letters from the people that had gotten them. So we think we made a big impact there. Shannon Savick, by the way, lost by over 35% in that race. So she really got stomped by Peggy Bennett. And this is a thank you note for some of that work.
What else did she do to get stomped that badly?
There's a couple things that Shannon did. One was that. The second one is she voted for the new Senate building. If you remember the $90, $85 million new Senate building that's sitting there on the north side of the Capitol, she voted for that. It was very unpopular in her district, and another political organization that supports Republican candidates spent a whole lot of money on TV ads, kind of bashing her over that. The other thing is Shannon, not the best well-intentioned, I think, but not the best public speaker in the world. So this other group assigned a tracker to her. So they had somebody following her around at all of her campaign appearances with a video camera. And Shannon just said dumb things on a regular basis. well, those would find their way into the next radio or TV ad. So it was kind of a perfect storm for her. Which, if you can afford to do that, by the way, trackers are awesome. Elections are a big deal. If you can unseat the people that you don't like and you can get people in that support your cause, whatever that is, you can really change things. We went from Michael Paymar, we talked about earlier, who wanted all this gun control, to the new chairman of the Public Safety Committee, who obviously doesn't like gun control. This is a picture off of his Facebook page. We got a pro-gun speaker instead of an anti-gun speaker with Kurt Dowd. And we got signs like this at the Capitol: gun owners are welcome, as opposed to what we got before, which was, your guns scare me, don't come. And this is from a lobby day that we held. There's lots of other ways to drive engagement. I'll just talk briefly about those. We do annual surveys, which kind of get people all fired up and give them a chance to feel engaged and ask questions and make input into your policies. But it also allows us to counter the kind of polls we see on our issue from the Star Tribune and others. The Star Tribune ran a poll earlier this year about background checks for guns at gun shows and in private sales, and said 84% of people and 75% of gun owners support such background checks. But when we ask our folks, using the language from the bill that's out there right now, 95% say no, 5% say yes. But if I ask you the question, do you think criminals should be able to just buy guns from anybody, you would probably say no. But if I ask you the question the way the law is actually worded, well, then you're going to be like, I don't want that. That's intrusive. That's crazy. We use petitions as a way to drive engagement. They're great for sign up at events and those kind of things. But we also try to find ways to be very active on social media, which we did using some of the National Guard incidents the military shooting incidents that occurred as things went on. We also would use things like infographics. This is from the suppressor legislation we worked on in 2015, where we use data. The sources for the data are at the bottom. You can't see on the screen here. But we tried to find ways to continually get people engaged, to have images that could be shared, and continue to kind of drive and advocate for our cause. And you can see here as some of the examples of some things that we did. We were able to get 5 pro-gun bills passed through the legislature in 2015, and then the governor had basically said he was going to veto them. So we blew his phones up, which was fun to do. And we did a lot on social media in terms of advertising like this in order to get people to do that. And we use our mailing list pretty effectively. At this time, we had about 8,000 gun owners on our mailing list. But we did a lot of things like this in terms of mailings in order to get folks to call and be engaged. And you can do this for any cause, really, that you want to push: Sunday liquor sales, or whatever it is that you're looking for. Just different variations of that. When the governor did sign the bill, well, then it's time to thank your supporters. And so this is what we were able to kick out with about 9,000 activists, 45,000 actions that they took, 202,000 emails, and got 5 bipartisan bills into law. So that takes us to the end of the session last year. Let me take the last 5 minutes here and tell you some of the things that we've been looking at since then and how you can apply this to what you're doing. Following the session last year, we launched a podcast, the Minnesota Gun Report, trying to find some different ways to engage different audiences into what we were doing. This has been much more popular than I ever expected. My political director had to talk me into doing this. But we're getting about 1,000 people listening to every episode, which is more than I ever thought. If you really want to listen to me ramble for 15 minutes, you can go listen. But for example, right now with the legislature in session, we're recording this late in the week, Thursday or Friday typically, and we're giving a rundown of what happened from a gun rights perspective at the legislature and what do we think is going to happen next. So you heard some of this from Andrew earlier today. But it's been extremely popular, and I think we're going to continue to find ways as we get into the election to keep using the podcast and bring some guests into that discussion. One of the other areas we've started taking on beginning in November is we started looking for governmental units here in the state that were infringing upon Second Amendment rights. On Election Day last year, And I live in Ramsey County, so this was quite personal to me. One of our supporters called and said, hey, I just went to vote in a church in St. Paul, and Ramsey County had gun ban signs posted. Can they do that? Well, they can't. Minnesota law says that government entities cannot ban the lawful carry of firearms with a very limited set of exceptions. You can't carry in a jail, you can't carry in a state prison, some of those things that are out there. But they had no authority to do this. So we played nice guy at first and sent a letter and said, here's a picture. We had the guy go back and take a photo of the sign. We mailed the sign, a photo of the sign to the head of Ramsey County Elections and said, we saw this at this church. Under what legal authority are you posting this sign? And please, be specific in your response. And he wrote back and said, well, there's a county ordinance, and the county ordinance says you can't have a firearm on county property, which is actually even worse. So we went, well, that's interesting. So then our lawyer, our general counsel, sent this letter, and you can read the whole letter on our website. It's a work of art that basically said, we demand that you do the following, because your county ordinance and your sign are completely illegal in the face of 2 state statutes, and here's what they are. And we want to hear back from you within 30 days, or we're going to take other legal action. So 4 or 5 days later, they call our general counsel and said, wow, okay, we didn't know, this was the county attorney that called. We didn't know that this was going on. We're going to need more than 30 days to research this. Can we have 6 weeks? And Ben's like, sure, I'll be reasonable, but but don't screw me in the process of this. And they called a few weeks later and said, okay, so we're going to do everything that you asked. We're going to remove the training, we're going to take the signs, we're not going to post signs anymore, and then here's the language that we're going to use. And Ben goes, our general counsel, that's great. I want you to send me a letter telling me that you're doing those things. And they went, whoa, wait a minute. Why do you need a letter? He goes, well, why do you think we need a letter? It's all crap if it's not in writing. What are you afraid of? And they were like, okay, we'll have to talk about this. So they called back and said, as long as you don't have to admit we were wrong, we'll send you a letter. We're like, well, we don't care. Just send us the letter. So here's their response. In February, 2 months in, exactly what they said they were going to do, and that was that. Now, they still have an ordinance that says that firearms are banned on county property, so we are in the process of documenting some county buildings with signs, and then we're going to have there'll be yet another legal conversation with them. One of the other areas that we've been looking at is gun safety or responsible gun ownership. And we've started to look at this area for this reason. And this is from yesterday's Min Post. There's an article about children and guns, time to stop this deadly mix. It's written by an attorney who says that the solution to gun safety is liability insurance. So I'm going to make you get insurance for to own firearms. And if you don't do certain things, then I'm going to have all of your insurance premiums raised. And he has some really interesting regulatory things that he wants to do. The other thing that's going on that I find just scary as heck is this is a new gun safety campaign called Be Smart for Kids. I think it's besmart.org if you want to go look it up. Join the campaign to reduce child gun deaths. And there's a video here about kids going over to their neighbor's house to play, and someone calls and says, do you own guns? And she goes, yeah. Well, I just want to make sure they're locked up. Well, they are. My husband has a gun safe, whatever. Seems like an innocuous conversation, right? Who do you think put this together? Michael Bloomberg's Everytown Gun Control Organization. So they're finding ways, now they're doing child education from a gun control perspective instead of looking at, say, the NRA, the world's largest firearm safety organization, or somebody else to do this. So we're starting to look at how do we counter this? How can we use our own gun safety program to make sure that it's being done from a factual basis, not from a gun control philosophical perspective. This led us to form a second organization that's aligned with our political action committee. It's a 501c4 that's going to work on the gun safety, lobbying, and some of those other areas that we were just talking about. So with that, I'll leave our websites up if you want to learn more about us. And I'd be happy to take your questions for 5 or 10 minutes here.
Have you ever dealt with people when the police departments will try to gun buyback?
Yeah.
And then people like myself, the collectors will show up, and they're like, oh, maybe I can find some old lady to train in, correct? Or late husband Luger for, E38 or something. I could pick up a collector item at for a son, and then the police come out and be like, no, we don't allow that, even though we've got permits to purchase, permits to carry.
Right.
All that other stuff. Would this be something that you would?
I'd be interested if you've had that happen. I'd love to hear about it.
Not personally, but
Okay.
friends of mine that have worked in the industry would do that. They've been shooed away by law enforcement.
And I've seen some of that in other states. We'd love to see if this happens in Minnesota. I'd love to hear about it, so we can take a look. I think because we've talked about, I shouldn't say we as an organization, supporters of ours have talked about going to a gun buyback and doing exactly the same thing. To try to purchase some things or just to see what the police might do in those situations. So there was a bill, there is a bill in the Minnesota House that's dead at this point, but there was a bill to fund gun buybacks across the state that didn't get anywhere. I think it had 2 sponsors and never got a hearing. But we were opposed to that. We think gun buybacks are completely ineffective as a public safety measure. And it's a bad use of tax dollars.
Have you seen Dimitri Karas's video where he makes a bunch of, there were $50 gift certificates for a gun? So he invested like $60 per zip gun.
Awesome.
Showed up with a whole car full and wanted to sell them back, and then they wouldn't because they didn't have serial numbers.
Yep.
I just want you to get shot my video saying that, you're going to sending me away with all of these unregistered guns.
Right.
And I don't know if that had any.
I hadn't seen that one, but my favorite gun buyback story is there's an organization in Champaign, Illinois, near where I grew up, called Guns Save Life. And I think that's their website, gunsavelife.org. But Chicago did this massive gun buyback a couple years back. And so they collected all of these old guns that their supporters had sitting around. They drove to Chicago with a group of volunteers, and they just started handing them in. And they got all of these gift cards for stuff, which they then brought back and donated to the youth, like trap league or whatever. And it was like they got $3,000 or $4,000 from the city of Chicago in gift cards to do this. I thought it was just hilarious. But now Chicago has put some guidelines in place where that can't happen. So it's a good use of anti-gun dollars. Sir?
Just curious, Jim McDonough, did you have any conversation with him personally, or?
I did not.
Okay. Another thing that's really good, I don't know, maybe you put it on there, when I used to read the NRA magazine all the time, the armed citizen was always uplifting.
Right.
To where it showed each month.
Yep.
Hey, somebody wasn't killed, it's the, kind of the answer to like throwing up. The other side throws up, hey, some kid got shot or whatever.
Right.
It's always how somebody defends.
How you change the narrative.
Maybe the other people don't, you want to explain?
Yeah, sure. So it is.
Good to put out there.
So I think the NRA has 3 magazines now. One is that members receive, but they have a column called The Armed Citizen. It's stories about the lawful use of firearms in self-defense. And there's usually, 8 to 10 brief, couple paragraph stories that are on there. But they're
For a homeowner or a store owner or something
Right.
that used it in defense of
But they're good.
family or their business.
and we know there's generally been, that we know of, 2 or 3 stories a year where a permit holder in Minnesota has used their firearm in self-defense. But interestingly enough, the state's reporting that's required under law for permits has never yet shown a lawful use of self-defense by a permit holder, which we know is wrong. So that'll be one of the things that we look at here. Sure. Yeah. We got time for one more question, then I'll let you get on to your, if there is one. Sir?
I have a question. Somebody was telling me, I think they might be a gun control person, that I was talking at work about getting a carry and conceal permit just because I take public transportation early.
Sure.
And he was saying that there's some kind of database, like if you get a carry and conceal, you got your gun on you, and like the police want to pull you over and somehow like from this database, something will emerge saying that you have a gun, so if they pull you over, they will know to be more cautious. Is that true?
Yeah, so there is a database in Minnesota of permit holders, because there has to be one to verify that your permit's valid. It's at the Bureau for Criminal Apprehension in St. Paul. But there are authorized users out in the field. So it's typically, though, dispatchers. It's not an officer on the road. And when an officer is stopping you, or they're using license plate recognition or something, they don't know that you have a permit, unless they specifically ask the dispatcher to look up that you have a permit. So it's a separate system entirely.